Hello, this is legal analyst Diane Bernholz. There was a huge development this week in the Etan Patz murder case. A federal appellate court reversed a lower court's denial of Pedro Hernandez's habeas petition and ordered that he be released from prison unless the state retries him within a reasonable period of time. In 2017, Hernandez was convicted by a jury in New York State for the 1979 kidnapping and murder of 6-year-old Etan Patz. Now, it's very unusual for a federal habeas petition to be granted or to not be granted and then reversed on appeal. So let's talk about why this happened. And this was truly the definition of a cold case, with the conviction coming nearly 40 years after Patz was murdered. Patz disappeared while walking just the 2 blocks to his school bus stop in New York City. And this was the very first time that he'd ever been allowed to walk alone to the bus stop. And he was one of the first missing children to ever appear on a milk carton, notifying the public that he was missing. And Hernandez worked at a bodega that was right next to this bus stop. He was 18 back in 1979, and despite a massive search and investigation, Patz was never found, and Hernandez was not considered a suspect at that time. In fact, someone else, an admitted child molester, was considered a suspect, but was never charged because of a lack of evidence. Now, the case went cold, but it was reinvigorated in 2012 when another suspect emerged, another admitted child molester, but he was never charged either. So according to the Second Circuit's 51-page opinion that just came out this week, the way that Hernandez became a suspect more than 30 years later was that Hernandez's brother-in-law called in a tip that Hernandez might be involved in Patz's murder. So you see, Hernandez had given various statements over the years to people that he knew about how he had killed a boy, but these statements varied wildly in terms of their detail, and they were never repeated to the police. So based on this tip from the brother-in-law, in May 2013, multiple police cars pulled up at Hernandez's house in New Jersey, where he was then living, and he agreed to accompany the police back to the police station. And after several hours of interrogation, Hernandez told police that he wanted to go home and that they were holding him against his will there in a small windowless room at the police station. And when questioned about the abuse he himself suffered as a child, according to the Second Circuit, he eventually began sobbing and he curled up on the floor in a fetal position. And then after 6 hours of interrogation, without receiving any Miranda warnings, Hernandez confessed to Patz's murder, saying that he had been standing outside the bodega when Patz walked by that day, that he asked Patz if he wanted a soda, and he said that he lured him to the basement where he choked him and then put his body in a trash bag and put it out with the garbage. So it was a horrible, horrible confession. Hernandez has been diagnosed with a myriad of mental illnesses, including schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and he has a documented very low IQ. So right after Hernandez confessed, then the police turned on their videotapes and began videotaping the interrogation. And at this time, they first provided Hernandez with his Miranda warnings. They then had Hernandez repeat the confession that he'd just given, and they prompted him a little bit, according to the Second Circuit, along the way. And then with the hours ticking by, they then eventually brought Hernandez before a prosecutor, and he confessed again. He was in custody and up virtually all night giving these confessions. Right. He was then arrested and taken to Bellevue Mental Hospital for psychiatric treatment. And there he talked about choking a child to a doctor and a nurse. And he eventually gave conflicting accounts to a psychiatrist, what exactly happened and whether other people were there. And he talked about hearing voices. Hernandez later recanted these confessions, and I'll be back to discuss what happened in court at trial. So please stay tuned. Thank you very much.